In the final days of the Second World War, when Berlin was burning, the German military was collapsing, and the last remaining loyalists were trapped underground in the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler spent his final hours not planning a comeback, not thinking about a final desperate attack, but obsessing over something deeply personal. What would happen to his body after he died? To understand why Hitler was so afraid, why he issued strict orders for the destruction of his corpse, and why he feared the Russians more than any other Allied power, we must look closely at another event that had shaken him to his core. That event was the death of his closest political ally in Europe, Benito Mussolini. Mussolini's fall came before Hitler's final collapse, and when Hitler learned how Mussolini's body had been treated, it struck him with fear in a way no military defeat had. In April 1945, Mussolini attempted to flee Italy as the Allies closed in. He was captured by Italian partisans, executed, and then placed in the hands of a furious crowd that had suffered under his dictatorship for years. His body, along with that of his mistress Clara Petacci and several other executed fascist officials, was taken to Milan. There, in an act of public humiliation and symbolic reversal of power, the bodies were strung up upside down at a fuel station in Piazzale Loreto. The civilians who had lived under Mussolini's rule came out in crowds. They shouted "spit," beat the bodies, threw objects, and released all the anger and grief that fascism had inflicted upon them. The scene was chaotic and emotional, a public judgment carried out by ordinary citizens. That moment was photographed, recorded, and broadcast around the world. The images spread quickly and reached Hitler inside his bunker in Berlin on April 29, 1945. Hitler's fear did not come from the military defeat itself. He had already accepted that Germany was lost. What terrified him was the idea of becoming a public spectacle. Hitler had built his political power on the idea of strength, control, and myth. The image of Mussolini swinging upside down, covered in bruises, spat upon by crowds, mocked by the very people he claimed to lead, shattered that illusion. Hitler realized that if the Soviets found him, his fate would be even worse. The Soviets had suffered more than any other Allied nation. Millions of soldiers had died. Cities had been destroyed. Civilians had been massacred. Hitler knew that the Red Army would not treat him gently. The Russian advance into Germany had already been marked by extreme brutality on both sides. The Eastern Front had been a battlefield of unimaginable violence. Hitler had ordered scorched earth policies. He had sent Einsatzgruppen and SS units into Soviet territories. He had declared the Russians subhuman. And now the Russians were approaching Berlin with full knowledge of what the Nazis had done. Hitler was aware that the Soviets had already uncovered evidence of concentration camps, mass killings, and forced labor. Soviet soldiers had seen the results with their own eyes, and their anger was building with every step. Hitler imagined exactly what would happen if the Soviets captured him alive or dead. He believed the Red Army would drag his corpse through the streets of Berlin, display it to the public, and let crowds take their revenge. He believed they would hang his body as the Italians had hung Mussolini's. He believed they would desecrate it, mock it, damage it, and broadcast it across the world as proof of his downfall. For someone who had spent his entire political life carefully controlling his image, this was a nightmare beyond anything else he faced. Inside the bunker, Hitler had already begun to withdraw from reality. His closest allies had abandoned him. Many had fled or tried to negotiate for their own survival. He saw betrayal everywhere. Reports coming into the bunker painted a picture of hopelessness. Berlin was surrounded, food was scarce, and even his most trusted officers could not give him any confidence that the city could be saved. As these pressures closed in on him, the images of Mussolini's corpse became a symbol not of defeat, but of humiliation. And humiliation was something Hitler could not tolerate. He believed that death was preferable to disgrace. He had declared many times in speeches that he would never allow himself to fall into enemy hands. But Mussolini's death made the situation emotional rather than ideological. Hitler was not only concerned with being captured alive, he was deeply fearful about what would be done to him after he was dead. For Hitler, the body carried symbolic power. Even in death, he believed he needed to maintain some form of control. He did not want the world to see his body violated. He did not want the Soviets to use it as propaganda. He did not want history to record an image of his corpse hanging in the streets, beaten, mocked, and exposed. This psychological fear shaped his final decisions. Sitting in the bunker, he discussed with his closest advisors how his death should be handled. He told them his body must not fall into enemy hands. He ordered that immediately after he and Eva Braun killed themselves, their bodies should be carried outside the bunker and burned until they were unrecognizable. This was not a casual request. It was a carefully planned instruction. He asked for gasoline to be brought into the bunker. He spoke with his aides about the exact procedure. He wanted full confirmation that the flames would be strong enough to leave nothing identifiable behind. The order reflected not a leader concerned about moral legacy, but a man consumed by fear of public humiliation. Even though Berlin was collapsing and thousands were dying in the streets above him, Hitler focused on preventing his body from becoming a symbol of mockery. He feared the Soviets more than the Americans or the British, because he knew that the Soviets had the strongest emotional reason to expose his corpse. He had unleashed a war of annihilation on them. He believed that they would treat him the way Mussolini had been treated, or worse. Hitler's fear also reflects something about the personality he carried throughout his rise to power. His self-image mattered enormously to him. He crafted his public appearances. He rehearsed speeches. He controlled how photographs were taken. He was highly sensitive to criticism. In his mind, the idea of having his dead body displayed to the world as a defeated tyrant was unbearable. It would destroy the myth he had created. For a man who built his power on myth, that destruction mattered as much as physical defeat. When the final moment came on April 30th, 1945, Hitler chose suicide. His last action was to dictate instructions for the destruction of his body. He and Eva Braun moved to his private quarters. A gunshot was heard. His aides entered the room shortly after and found him dead. The next step followed the plan he had already created. His body, along with Eva Braun's, was carried out of the bunker's emergency exit and placed in a bomb crater. Gallons of gasoline were poured over the bodies. The flames rose, but the destruction was incomplete. Because Berlin was under bombings and gunfire, and burning bodies fully was extremely difficult under those chaotic conditions. Still, the act was carried out enough to deny the Soviets a complete body. When Soviet troops eventually reached the bunker area, they found remains but not an intact corpse. They collected fragments, teeth, and bones, and transported them for analysis. But Hitler's fear had been partially fulfilled. The Soviets did take what remained of him, and they did keep it secret. For decades, the Soviet government kept details of Hitler's remains classified. They feared that any public information, even about bones or ashes, could be misused politically. Eventually, the remains were destroyed completely in 1970 under orders from the KGB to make sure nothing could ever be used as a symbol by extremist groups. The irony is that Hitler's attempt to prevent public humiliation did not stop his body from becoming a source of fascination. The absence of a publicly displayed corpse created rumors that he might have escaped. Conspiracy theories grew for decades. Many people claimed he fled to South America or lived in hiding. These stories were false, but they gained traction because Hitler's body had not been publicly shown in the way Mussolini's had. The ambiguity created myths that continue even today. In trying to protect his image, Hitler inadvertently created the conditions for conspiracy theories that lasted generations. His fear of Russian capture also speaks to his understanding of what the war had become. Hitler believed that the conflict with the Soviet Union was not merely political or military, but racial and existential. He understood that the Soviets saw the Nazis as architects of unimaginable suffering. He knew what they had discovered in Eastern Europe. He knew the camps were being liberated. He understood that the Soviets had personal and national reasons to treat him with revenge. Whether his fear was precise or exaggerated no longer matters. What matters is that, for him, it was real, powerful, and overwhelming. In the end, Hitler's fear of the Soviets finding his body reveals several things about him. It shows his obsession with image. It shows his understanding of the scale of crimes he committed. It shows his sensitivity to humiliation. And it shows that even in his final moments, when the world around him was collapsing, he was most concerned not with saving Germany, not with protecting civilians, not with negotiating peace, but with controlling how history would see him.